All right, elementary schools this week after this shooting, the immediate cry was to do something, particularly something involving gun control. And every time this happens, we get the same thing. And the this demand for gun control, the whole thing can be deafening. But if the proposal for more gun control laws, which President Biden and the Democrats are demanding, actually worked, wouldn't gun violence be solved in places like New York City, Chicago, and even in Washington, D.C.? Well, joining now to discuss this is John Lott. He's the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. John, welcome to Washington Watch.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So John, let me ask you this. Is there a positive correlation between strict gun laws and the absence of gun violence, or is it the opposite, which the cities that have the strictest gun laws being among the jurisdictions with the highest rates of gun violence? Which is it?
Well, what you find is that when places adopt stricter gun control laws, there tends to be an increase in violent crime. I'll give you a simple example. Every place in the world that's banned either all guns or all handguns has seen an increase in murder. I mean, you'd think out of randomness, you'd get at least one time where it went down or at least stayed the same. And yet every single time it's gone up. It's just not places like Washington, D.C. or Chicago, which have had handgun bans. You know, gun control advocates will say, look, if you have to ban guns every place, because if you just ban it in one city or so, it won't work because they'll get guns from other places. Of course, they really don't explain, it would have been nice if they'd kind of let us in on the secret before when they were pushing this, that it wasn't going to work. But, you, as I say, you think you at least find one place. And what happens is that when you have these types of laws, you run the risk that it's primarily law-abiding good citizens who obey them and not the criminals. And to the extent that you disarm law-abiding citizens relative to criminals, you're actually going to make it easier for criminals to go and commit crimes. And it's the same type of... Go ahead.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if you can't... Who are you going to pick on? Someone who can defend themselves or someone who is a soft target that cannot defend themselves?
Right. Well, I mean, we can also see that in terms of these gun-free zones that we have. Over 94% of the successful mass public shootings that have occurred in the United States since 1950 have taken place in areas where citizens weren't allowed to be able to go and have guns. I mean, if you read the manifesto from the Buffalo shooter just a couple weeks ago, he talks about his ideal target being a place where people aren't allowed to have concealed handguns. I mean, you mentioned that you were a police officer. Police, if you put one police officer in a place who's in uniform and he's trying to guard against a potential mass public shooting, he has a very difficult task. Being in uniform, and if he's believed to be the only person there who has a gun, who do you think an attacker is going to attack first? He's going to attack the person in uniform there because he knows that once he kills that individual there, he's going to have free reign to go after other people. And if you're guarding a place like a school or someplace else, hour after hour, day after day, week after week, it's hard to, be incredibly vigilant all the time. And besides, you don't have eyes in the back of your head there. This Buffalo shooter had cased the grocery store beforehand. He knew that there was one armed guard that was there who was in uniform. He knew where the guard would be stationed. So it's not too surprising that he's the first person that he would take out in something like this. The advantage that you have with concealed carry is that you take away those tactical advantages that the attacker has, because what happens is that if he, let's say, goes after the uniformed officer or guard there, he reveals his position and he has to worry that somebody behind him or to the side, somebody who he wasn't able to identify as having a gun, is going to be able to go and stop him at that point. And so it actually makes it safer for the officer or the guard that's going to be there.
People don't realize that the police are only about 1% of the population. It's kind of hard for 1% to protect the other 99%.
It's less than 1%.
I want to get to one. I want, yeah, it is declining as more and more are kind of driven from law enforcement because of this whole hostility we've seen from the left toward law enforcement. But I want to very quickly, we're almost out of time. Your research has found that 92% violent crimes do not involve guns. Quickly tell us about that, because I think that's very significant.
Right. Well, I guess given how much I'm in this, I'm kind of surprised that other people don't realize that. But yeah, over 92% of violent crimes does not involve guns in any way. We recently just did a survey, hired McLaughlin and Associates. The average likely voter out there thinks that slightly over 46% of violent crime involves guns. And, that's not really too surprising given that Biden and many Democrats focus on a gun-only policy. I mean, Biden's given 4 addresses on violent crime. He's mentioned police 4 times, and when he mentions police, it's in terms of police enforcing gun control laws. He hasn't mentioned anything about prosecutors not prosecuting violent criminals. He hasn't mentioned anything about cuts in police budgets or restrictions on what police can do, or large numbers of inmates being released from jails or other things. But look, the bottom line is you fight gun violence in the same way that you fight any other type of violent crime. You have to make it risky for criminals to go and commit crimes. And you make that with higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences.
Yeah. John, we're up against a break, but fascinating conversation. I'm going to get you back on again, and we're going to continue this conversation. Thanks so much for being with us.